Okay, hold up for a sec. Due to the nature of this show's plot, it's impossible to talk about the majority of its themes, the development of its characters, without mentioning certain things that some people might consider to be spoilers. As such, it is this reviewer's opinion that you stop the video and go watch the series right now. Hell, I'll even make it easy for you. So with everything that I have yet to talk about in mind, I've meticulously calculated values for the categories of story, characters, animation, sound, and my own personal enjoyment, which after something spoilers and letting Dung Beetle die in a fire, has me awarding Bokurano with an overall score of 8.58 out of 10, and giving it a rating of certified frosty. A rating for only the best of the best, and those too important to ignore. So with that, go ahead in the knowledge that this series is awesome, and you should watch it. Once you have, or if you don't care about plot spoilers, you can come back and see why I did this little elaborate change to the order in which I do things in my reviews. I'll give you a second as I drink some tea. Okay, ready? Let's go. Deconstructions of various genres have kind of been one of those fan-favorite things over the last number of years, especially from shows that you don't expect it from. For those of you who don't remember, a deconstruction is when you take popular tropes from a familiar genre and twist them and turn them on their head. It subverts a lot of the unspoken rules of the genre, the things that the viewer takes for granted, by placing them in a more realistic scenario. Bokurano is one such deconstruction, this time on the mech genre. Now you might be thinking, we've seen mech deconstructions before. And yes, you would be correct. Evangelion, very popular. Even Gurren Lagann, though that's a deconstruction in a different sense that we might discuss on a later date. However, Bokurano is different than both of those because, well, it's rather bleak. It's a series where at some point you will realize everything that could go wrong, everything that could change the situation for the worst, will happen and will continue to happen. It's a look into the minds and motivations of the human race through the eyes of 15 very different middle school children who just happen to be bored on a beach one day. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection. Today, Bokurano Ars. Let's jam. Our setting is that of the real world, and might as well be considered as such for the sake of comparison. We start off in Japan with a group of 15 children who are enjoying, or at least trying to enjoy, some summer time on the beach. After taking the suggestion from one of them to explore some nearby caves, because honestly they had nothing better to do, they come across an alcove filled with computers and other out-of-place technologies set up in a cavern rather suspiciously. Cue the owner of said tech lab arriving shortly afterwards. This man, Kokopelli, convinces the children to help him out by agreeing to play a game that he has designed. A game where you pilot a giant robot, fight monsters, and save the world. Thinking that this is a rather cool idea, each of them in turn places their hand on a small podium to sign their contract and play the game. Soon after, they find that the game they are playing is very real, and the consequences are much higher than any of them expected. At this point, everything is fairly standard. You could see this as the plot for any generic mech series, even one with Gundam in the title. One would expect at this point that the children take the robot, they go, they fight the monsters, they save the world, and everybody is happy. Oh, if only it were that simple. There is, of course, a catch to this series, and it's the reason I had my warning up front in this video. You see, piloting this show's mech, called Zereth, is not as simple as telling it what to do. It requires power to function, specifically power that it takes from the pilot's life force. So when you're done piloting, you die. As such, over the course of the series, our main characters are faced with an interesting conundrum. Pilot the mech and die, or don't pilot the mech and everyone dies. Let's just say that running away isn't really an option. To me, I think the characters represent both the absolute best that this show has, as well as perhaps some of the not-so-great parts. First off, there is a lot of them. Even in a show with 24 episodes like this one has, the characters make everything really crowded. However, to combat this, all of the main characters have what I can only describe as brilliant characterization for the small amount of time we get with each of them. A single character arc in this series lasts for at max 2 episodes, which is enough time to learn which character is the next pilot of the mech, find out their backstory, and then watch as they defeat the latest mechanical monstrosity that attacks the planet. Their backstories are the best part, as most of them are psychologically broken in some way, or some from situations where, now that they're in a life or death scenario where they will most likely die to save the planet, those who they leave behind are going to be much worse off. You really want to relate to these characters, you really truly do! But it's hard to relate to characters who you hope a little that you're wrong, but you know that they're gonna die by the end of their arc. What's worse is that after their arc is over, the next one begins immediately, so you're given no time to mourn before you are thrown into the world of yet another character. It's like getting a serious case of emotional whiplash. Now, I'm not gonna go into each of these characters individually because, as I said, there are a lot of them and I haven't the time. Plus, you'd do better to just watch their stories for yourself, as the show does a much better job presenting them to you than I could do justice in only a few minutes. That said, however, I will take a moment to explain one supporting character who deserves note. Dung Beetle. How do you describe a character like him? Well, if this was any other anime, Dung Beetle would be the fun-loving, helpful sidekick or mascot of the series, who is with our characters until the bitter end. Unfortunately, he lives up to his name rather well, and is one of the biggest assholes to ever grace the story of an anime. His role in the show is best described by saying that he is the Kyubey of the series, even though technically Dung Beetle existed first. Now, most people consider Kyubey to be the most evil, soul-sucking, black-hearted bunny cat to ever exist. But Dung Beetle makes Kyubey look like Jesus in comparison. Kyubey is evil by being apathetic and dedicated to his goals. While to us and the characters of his show, Madoka Magica, he seems evil and reprehensible, in reality there's no actual evil intent behind his actions because that's not how he thinks. Sure, he may have convinced a group of young girls to enter into a contract that costs their souls, but to their credit, if they actually asked him about the terms of the contract, he would have willingly told them. Dung Beetle is just a dick. He plays with the emotions of our characters for his own amusement. He lies to them when it suits them, and he abuses his powers to trick and confuse anyone just to achieve his goals. He is the biggest sack of shit that I have ever bore witness to, and I hope he dies in a fire. So with that out of the way, what's interesting to me about the character designs before we get to the actual animation in a moment is just, well, how plain the characters actually are. Seriously, if I didn't know any better, they could very easily look like they were supporting characters for another show, which has both good and bad points to it. On the good side, it means we're not bombarded by characterization. Our cast is extremely large, and if they all had the same hairstyles, outfits, and general look as the stereotypical anime protagonists, things would look, well, rather gaudy. On the other hand, because they are all so plain, it's really hard to remember them. After watching this show, you'll remember their stories. By God, you will remember their stories. But you might have a hard time describing the look of the characters themselves if someone happened to ask you. I suppose, though, that could be taken in a positive light by saying that their beauty lies in the simplistic nature of it all. Now, the animation itself ranges from great to poor depending on the scene, but hey, that's par for the course. This is a gonzo show. They can be freaking amazing sometimes and then have no idea what they're doing the next. Thankfully, at no point did they ever hit a really major low with this series, and while a lot of the time the animation comes off as, well, fairly average for its time, it excels with the mech battles that occur, every number of episodes, as those are really something. Also, you know how the majority of the time, the animation in any anime's opening is not very indicative of the show itself because it usually was produced separately and just happens to be the best animation that exists in the entire show? Bokurano doesn't do that. The entirety of the show's opening are copy-pasted shot-for-shot scenes from the actual show, sort of like a mini preview of what is to come and a reminder of what has already happened, depending on how far in you are watching the series. I kind of wish more shows were able to do that, but it requires more work in that the entire show has to be almost finished by the time the first episode airs, which nowadays is usually not something that happens. Now, the music of the show, with the exception of the show's opening and ending, which are phenomenal, is probably one of its weaker parts. Not because it's unsatisfactory, but because nothing really stands out. I don't claim to be a master of music, especially not the critique of it, so when I listen to music from an anime, all I'm looking for is that one song. The one song that you're gonna get stuck in your head. The one song that when you hear it, you know shit is about to go down. The one song that perfectly describes the major themes of the show all on its own. Bokurano didn't have it. Sure, what it did have, as far as musical themes for all the characters, was beautiful, but I feel that it was more so beautiful as an accompaniment to the stories themselves, rather than beautiful on its own. It is very atmospheric, and the only problem with that is that on its own, there's not much to talk about. Granted, few people actually listen to anime soundtracks on their own. I happen to be in the minority, apparently, but still. Not to sound like a very shitty version of the ending of Fallout 3, the story of Bokurano is a story about sacrifice, but also about greed. It's a story about children who have gotten in way over their heads with something that they should never have been involved with in the first place. And all because some mystical entity that pulls all the strings willed it, they must give up their lives for the sake of their world. A world that, in some cases, really doesn't give two shits about them. It revolves a little bit around nihilism, the belief that life is meaningless, which is a mindset that several of our characters share over the course of the series, with good reason. But the real beauty of the show is how our characters deal with their situations, and of course, their ultimate fate. It's interesting how old the show is as well, as it came out in 2007. To put you in the right historic frame of mind, 2007 was the year that Bokurano came out, the year that Lucky Star came out. But nobody seems to talk about Bokurano that much, if at all, almost like it got buried. Like, people still talk about Bokurano, well, okay, that's not necessarily true. I still talk about Bokurano, but you'd be hard-pressed to find someone that does not seen or has an opinion on Lucky Star. Bokurano is a gem that should be sought out by a larger audience than I have seen to exist. So if you haven't watched it, forgetting the fact that you ignored my initial warning at the start of this video, you really should go watch it. Granted, it's not very easy to find, as it's never been licensed by any North American company, so you can't buy it in a store, either in person or online, and to my knowledge, there is no place that streams it legally online either, so we're left with fan subs, but who knows, maybe if there's a resurgence in popularity, some enterprising anime-related company might, pick it up, and then we could buy it. Maybe they'll even give it a dub. Now, let's just put that score back up for a quick moment for those who forgot about it, and attempt to continue as usual. For alternate anime recommendations, I point you towards the much-praised Madoka Magica, which shares a number of themes and plot-related elements with Bokurano. Hell, it even has a direct reference to it in the show. So yeah, it deserves mention. As well, I would also like to recommend Future Diary. Granted, that one is much more violent than Bokurano, but both have their share of nightmare fuel for those looking for it. Between those, you should find something to your liking. And that's it from me. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, follow me on Twitter if you feel so inclined, and until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, stay frosty.